That's not just a photo. That couple sold their house 8 months ago. They bought the van of their dreams, and they are now standing outside it at 11 p.m., trying to find anywhere at all, to legally sleep. Their names are Gary and Linda, retired teacher and an ER nurse. Combined savings, around $340,000. They did everything the van life YouTube community told them to do. Bought a quality van, got solar, got lithium, joined the Facebook groups, watched every tour video. What nobody told Gary and Linda, what almost nobody tells you, is that the van is the easy part. The parking in coastal states in 2026, that's a legal minefield that is actively getting worse every single year. And it is specifically designed, not intentionally, but structurally, to catch people exactly like them. I'm going to show you what happened to Gary and Linda. I'm going to walk you through the real legal landscape state by state, and I'm going to show you why this is getting harder, not easier. And I'm going to give you the actual framework that separates the retirees who are still living this life happily at year 5 from the ones who quit by year 2 and took a loss on the van. This isn't a scare piece. It's the briefing you deserved before you ever walked into a dealership. The scale of the problem. Why coastal states are a different legal universe. Most people think the problem is bad parking apps or not knowing the right spots. The real trigger is something much more structural, and once you understand it, the whole landscape makes sense. Here's the contrast that makes it clear. Drive your campervan through Montana, Wyoming, or the Texas Hill Country, BLM land, up to 14 consecutive nights, free, legally, with almost zero friction. The infrastructure supports it. The culture accepts it. Rangers will wave at you. Now drive that exact same van, let's say a Mercedes-Benz Sprinter-based conversion, or a Winnebago Solis, or a Heimer Grand Canyon S, into Santa Monica, California, or Sarasota, Florida, or Cannon Beach, Oregon. Same van, completely different legal universe. Here's why. Coastal states are dealing with a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis at the same time, in the same geography. Local governments are under pressure from two sides: wealthy homeowners who don't want inhabited vehicles near their properties, and housing advocates trying to use anti-camping enforcement to address visible homelessness. The retiree in a $130,000 Sprinter conversion gets caught directly in the middle of that political collision. And here's the part that genuinely shocks people. The law does not distinguish between a custom-built Winnebago Solis and a rusted sedan with a sleeping bag in the back. If the ordinance says no overnight parking of inhabited vehicles, it applies to both equally with identical enforcement consequences. Most people think the inconsistency protects them, that if nobody has ticketed them yet, they're fine. The real trigger for enforcement isn't a pattern, it's a single neighbor complaint. You can park in the same spot 6 nights without issue and get a knock on the window on the 7th because someone 3 houses away filed an app-based complaint at 10 p.m. That inconsistency is not a loophole, it is the trap. But here's where it gets worse, because the ticket isn't the problem Gary and Linda faced. The problem was what happened after the 3rd ticket, and it's something nobody in the van life community talks about publicly. State by state, the real picture in 2026. Let me walk you through the 5 coastal states where this is most acute, and I'll bring Gary and Linda back in along the way, because what happened to them maps almost perfectly onto the progression I'm about to describe. California. Most people think California is the hardest state for van life because of the tickets. The real trigger is something called vehicle habitation classification, and most people have never heard of it until it's already on their record. California's laws tightened in 2023 and again in early 2025. Several municipalities now define overnight vehicle habitation as a quality of life infraction, a different enforcement tier than a simple parking ticket. That's not a semantic distinction. A quality of life infraction can appear on background checks, not for criminal records, but for rental applications, RV park memberships, and permit programs, which means if your van life situation becomes untenable and you need a fallback option, like renting an apartment or booking a full-service RV park while you regroup, those violations can actively block you. Los Angeles technically has a safe parking program. It serves fewer than 1% of the vehicles that need it. Enrollment requires inspections, interviews, and an approved lot assignment. San Diego, Santa Cruz, and San Francisco all have active overnight bans for inhabited vehicles. The definition of inhabited is the part that trips people up. A van with a bed, cooking equipment, or stored personal items can be classified as inhabited even when you're not physically inside it. Gary and Linda parked outside Santa Cruz for 4 nights before their first citation. By night 7, their second citation included an inhabited vehicle classification. They didn't know what that meant until a month later when they tried to book 2 weeks at an RV park in Oregon and got flagged in the system. Oregon. Most people think Oregon is van-friendly because of all the nature content creators based there. And inland Oregon genuinely is. The real trigger is the coast, specifically the Highway 101 corridor from Astoria to Gold Beach. Post-COVID van life tourism surged through that corridor. Small towns got overwhelmed. Cannon Beach, Tillamook, Lincoln City, these are not large municipalities. They don't have infrastructure for seasonal van dwelling. Between 2023 and 2025, they passed wave after wave of seasonal overnight ordinances. The permit programs they created are quota limited. They sold out for the entire summer 2026 season by mid-February. If you're planning an Oregon coast loop in July and you haven't already secured permitted spots, you are parking illegally every single night on that stretch. Not technically, actually.
Florida. Most people think Florida is a great van life state because of the weather and the fact that it's a domicile-friendly state with no income tax. The real trigger is the difference between coastal Florida and inland Florida, and most van life content doesn't distinguish between the two. Inland Florida, the Ocala National Forest, Lake Okeechobee, the Big Cypress area, is legitimately van-friendly. Coastal Florida is a different world entirely. Monroe County covers the Florida Keys. There's a county ordinance making it illegal to sleep in a vehicle anywhere in Monroe County, not just on public streets, in commercial parking lots, on private property unless you have written, dated permission from the property owner on file. That's the Florida Keys, off-limits unless you're in a registered campground or RV park. Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties have aggressive vehicle habitation enforcement. And Florida has a wrinkle that doesn't exist in most states, HOA-adjacent ordinance zones. A remarkable percentage of Florida's coastal land is effectively HOA territory, and in unincorporated areas, HOA-adjacent ordinances can give enforcement authority to private security, not just city officers. Gary and Linda made it to Florida in month 4. They knew about the Keys ban. What they didn't know was the Palm Beach HOA zone issue. Their van got a 24-hour notice to vacate taped to the windshield on a street that looked, by every map they checked, like a public road. It was, but the unincorporated county designation put it in a different enforcement tier. Washington State. Most people think Washington is progressive and therefore van-friendly. The real trigger is that progressive politics in dense urban areas produce the most complicated vehicle habitation framework in the country, not the most permissive one. Seattle has changed its vehicle habitation policy 3 times in 5 years. The current 2026 framework allows overnight dwelling in designated zones, but requires a safe parking network permit administered by nonprofits. That sounds reasonable until you understand who the system was built for. It was designed for people experiencing housing instability, not retirees with retirement savings. The intake process includes social services interviews and income verification. Showing up with $300,000 in a brokerage account doesn't disqualify you, but it makes the process uncomfortable, slow, and structurally misaligned with your situation. Outside the metro, the Olympic Peninsula and Coastal Highway 101 are legitimately good. Seasonal, heavily used, but legitimate. New Jersey and the Mid-Atlantic coast. This is the one most van life content ignores completely because it's not photogenic enough to build content around. It is legally the most hostile coastline in the country. New Jersey has no state-level framework. Every municipality legislates independently. The Jersey shore towns, Asbury Park, Cape May, Long Beach Island, have had overnight vehicle ordinances since the 1980s. Those laws were written to stop beach camping. They have never been updated. They apply in full to a modern $140,000 Heimer. And NJ municipal enforcement is aggressive because parking revenue is a genuine budget line for small towns. There is nowhere on the New Jersey coast to legally overnight in a campervan outside of a registered campground or RV park. Not occasionally, not if you're careful. Nowhere. I need to stop here and say something that the van life community genuinely does not want to hear. Stealth camping is not a legal strategy. It is a temporary gamble with permanent consequence risk. I know there's an entire subculture, forums, YouTube channels, Facebook groups, built around stealth van builds. Dark window tint, no external lights after 10 p.m., curtains up by 8, no camp chairs outside. I understand the appeal. For a 27-year-old with a lease they can go back to, the downside of getting caught is a $150 ticket and an inconvenient night. Fine, but here's the thing most people think about stealth camping. They think the worst case is a ticket. The real trigger for catastrophic outcomes is the impound chain. In California, Oregon, and Florida, 3 or more overnight parking violations within 90 days can trigger a nuisance vehicle classification. A nuisance vehicle can be impounded with 24 hours notice instead of the standard 72. Storage fees run $85 to $150 per day. If you're in a rural area when your van gets impounded and you have no secondary vehicle, you now have fees accumulating while you arrange transport, which means you're looking at $2,000 to $5,000 before you get your van back, with no guarantee that the impound facility hasn't damaged something in the process. For a retiree on a fixed income, that is not an inconvenience. That is a retirement capital event. Gary and Linda narrowly avoided this in their 6th month. They didn't tell me they narrowly avoided it because they were careful. They avoided it because Linda spotted the classification language on their 2nd California citation, and they left the state 2 days later. Most people don't catch that language. Most people don't even know to look for it. What actually works? The legal framework. Most people think the solution to parking problems is a better app, free campsites, iOverlander, the dirt. The real trigger for long-term success is building a parking architecture before you buy, not after you're already living in the van. Here's what that architecture actually looks like. The hybrid budget model. The most experienced full-timers don't try to park free every night. They budget $400 to $600 per month for paid spots. Campgrounds, harvest hosts vineyard stops, boondockers welcome driveways, RV park nights when they need laundry or hookups. The paid nights are strategic anchors. They reset your legal exposure. They give you documented, clean overnight records if you ever need to push back on an enforcement action. This model only works financially if your van isn't bleeding you dry on monthly payments. A $180,000 Winnebago Bolt or a Storyteller Overland Mode at $1,500 a month leaves no room for a $500 parking budget. A $72,000 used Sprinter conversion caught cash? Now you have actual flexibility. The math is simple. Van payment plus parking budget must fit inside your monthly income with margin. If it doesn't, the van life fantasy becomes a financial pressure cooker. Domicile in a van-friendly state. Your legal home address doesn't have to be where you physically are. South Dakota, Texas, and counterintuitively, certain Florida counties are popular domicile states for full-timers. No state income tax, straightforward RV registration, and established mail forwarding infrastructure. South Dakota domicile costs approximately $50 in DMV fees and 1 night in a motel with a receipt. It doesn't change where you park, but it changes your insurance classification, your tax exposure, and in some enforcement situations, your legal standing when pushing back on a citation. This is not a loophole, it's a legitimate structure that full-time travelers have used for decades, but it has to be set up before you're in the van, not 6 months in when you're already dealing with citations.
Private property agreements. This is the most underused option in the van life toolkit, and it's the one that gives Gary and Linda their stability now. Churches, vineyards, farms, rural businesses, many are willing to allow an overnight vehicle for $100 to $200 per month, or in exchange for some light maintenance help. In coastal California wine country, I know retirees paying $175 a month to park in a vineyard's overflow lot with a 30-amp electrical hookup. That is a legal, stable home base. It doesn't appear on any app. It requires a conversation and a handshake deal, and it is categorically different, legally and practically, from hoping you don't get a knock on the window at midnight. Seasonal rotation. The coastal parking pressure in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California drops significantly between October and April. Enforcement is lighter. Campgrounds have availability. The crowds are gone. If you're a retiree with genuine schedule flexibility, which is theoretically the entire point of retirement, you can route the Pacific Coast in shoulder season and spend peak summer months in the Rockies, the Southwest, or if you're an EU buyer or dual citizen, running coastal France, Portugal, or Spain's Rías Bajas, where the motorhome camping legal framework is dramatically more permissive than anything on the US coast. The buying decision filter. Most people think buying the right van means finding the right features list. The real trigger for long-term success is buying the right financial structure, and the van is just one variable in that structure. Here's what the legal parking reality means for your purchase. Smaller footprint reduces friction. A Ford Transit or Ram ProMaster build is less visually prominent than a full-size Class C. That's not about deception, it's about the human discretion that exists at every enforcement level. Officers have discretion. They exercise it based on what they see. Self-sufficiency is leverage. Solar, lithium batteries, a solid fresh water tank. Every dependency you eliminate is a night you don't have to park near services. Every night you don't have to park near services is a night you have more legal options. Depreciation is your exit. A $160,000 new Airstream Interstate loses 35 to 40% in the first 3 years. If your parking situation becomes untenable, and for some people it will, not because they failed, but because the laws keep shifting, a van that held its value gives you an exit with capital intact. A van that lost $60,000 in 3 years gives you a loss. The vans with the best resale in this segment tend to be mid-tier, well-maintained, purpose-built conversions from established manufacturers. Used Winnebago Bolt and Solus models in the $70,000 to $90,000 range, used Pleasureway Plateau models, and well-documented custom Sprinter builds with a paper trail. Not the cheapest, not the most expensive, the ones where the math still works when you need to change direction. Who should buy? Who should wait? You're ready to move forward if you have domicile sorted, you have a hybrid parking budget built into your monthly numbers, not optimistically projected, actually funded. You have at least 2 or 3 private property arrangements identified on your planned route, and you have a financial fallback that isn't the van itself. That last one is the one most people skip. Take more time if you're planning to sell the house, buy the van, and figure out parking later. That sequence produces the Gary and Linda situation in month 1, not month 6. The research has to come before the purchase, not after you're already living in it. Specifically for European buyers, if you're purchasing for European coastal touring with U.S. legs, a growing segment, build a larger per-night budget for your North American itinerary. France's AIRS system, the Iberian Peninsula's wild camping provisions, Germany's Stelzplatz network, none of these have a U.S. equivalent. The U.S. requires either more money or more planning than European van lifers typically expect. Gary and Linda are still in the van. I want to be clear about that. They're still doing it. But here's what Linda told me when I talked to her recently. The first 6 months felt like we were constantly one bad night away from losing everything we'd built. Not the money, the dream. That phrase, one bad night away from losing the dream, is what happens when people buy the van before they build the framework. You cannot get those retirement years back. You cannot unsell the house. You cannot undo the purchase of a $160,000 vehicle if the financial structure underneath it doesn't hold. The van life industry will sell you the sunset, it will sell you the Instagram moment and the feeling of freedom and the idea that you've escaped the system. What it will not sell you, because it doesn't make for good content, is the municipal ordinance database, the domicile paperwork, the private property conversation with a vineyard owner in Sonoma County, the parking budget line item in your monthly spreadsheet. But that unglamorous infrastructure, that is the actual difference between the retirees who are still doing this at year 5, happy, solvent, genuinely free, and the ones who are back in a one-bedroom apartment wondering where it went wrong. You don't get a redo on this capital. You don't get a redo on these years. Do the work before you turn the key. One question, I want a real answer, not just agreement. Gary and Linda's situation. Sold the house, bought the van, no parking plan. Whose fault is that? The van life content creators who never showed the reality? The industry that didn't disclose it? Or on them for not researching hard enough? Because I have a very strong opinion and I genuinely want to know if you see it differently. Drop it below. Every comment gets read.